You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we are talking about learning a second language. Second programming language, that is. We'll discuss the differences in the second language to your primary, and then go through some tips and tricks to use while learning, taking into consideration previous knowledge from your primary language. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
I am doing the last few things to switch my server over to Linux.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Getting the last few podcast episode backups, moved across, which doesn't sound that bad until you realize that, 3/4 of a terabyte of data moving across a network is not a very fast operation.
You like big data and you cannot lie.
All of you other scuzzies can't deny. So how about you?
Well, I am still fighting in Hibernate.
Saw that today.
I think I'm going to be doing that for a while, at least while I'm on this particular project at work. Don't get me wrong, I really do enjoy using it. It's just in Hibernate, Link is a little bit different from Link,
and it's a little different than Fluent in Hibernate,
yes,
as well too, which is
what I've used before, which is Fluent. Yeah, I did recently get to do some SQL. Our DBA is out of town. And so I got to create some tables and mess around in the database. That was both frustrating and fun. Thankfully, my boss is really cool, and he knows that that's not my particular area of expertise, that I know a little bit about it. And he was very willing to help out when I did have a few questions. So that was kind of cool. And we had a remote pair programming session today. We were both remote.
Nice.
So, it's going pretty good at the job. I'm really enjoying it. Making some friends. You got to meet
Cody.
Yeah, Cody, one of my coworkers. He's the lead developer on the team, and we're gonna be having him on the podcast for you guys.
Yeah,
pretty soon.
As soon as you've got a subject already figured out.
Yeah.
And then he's got to tell us what kind of beer he likes to drink, because he hasn't done that really officially yet, and that's part of the onboarding process.
That's true.
And then we're good.
Yeah. That'll be fun. It'll be interesting to have having someone else from work on for an episode or two just to talk about things. So, it's pretty much all I've got going on. Let's go ahead and roll the music. This week for IoTs, I have an article talking about industrial Internet of Things. And this is Industrial IoT Standards in the Works. Basically, the Organization for Machine Automation and Control, OMAC, the OPC Foundation, and the PLC Open have each independently worked on different aspects of standardization for IoT in the industrial space, but now they are combining their efforts to create specifications for standards and protocols. And the idea is to allow seamless industrial IoT interoperability. So it's a pretty neat article. They go into a lot more detail than what I just said. They talk about how they're working together and who's doing what. So check it out. I'll have a link for it in the show notes. Who's talking to us this week?
Well, this week we have a comment from Andrew Del Mar. It says, obviously you're serious about your work. Otherwise the podcast wouldn't be where it is today.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. We do our own editing and mastering. And this show started off kind of as a pet project for us. And it's grown into something that we really look forward to recording each week. We've made friends just from the podcast, and
quite a few.
Yeah, we've met a lot of other developers, people learning to code, and a lot of guys and some gals too that are into audio as well. And we've learned from them. So it's been a great process. Andrew, if you'll shoot us an email, we've got some CDP swag just for you. And guys, if you would like your very own Complete Developer Podcast swag, leave us a review on iTunes, comment on the website, or any of our social media. We've got all our shows on Facebook, Google+, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're out there.
We've been told that a few times. We're out there.
That's true. That is so true. All right. So Will wrote this outline, and he starts off with a few things to consider, or considerations.
Yeah, and this is assuming you already know the second language that you're trying to pick up. In other words, you know what it is. You're not just randomly going, I'll learn a new language. Because that's kind of a different part of the process, right?
Oh, yeah.
You got to find something that looks compelling and you want to do something with it.
Yes, exactly. I was thinking that this first part was about selecting that second language.
It could be. A lot of it's going to be based on what you want to do with it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But the big thing is how different is the new language from what you already have. And so these considerations are things like the environment that you're running under. So like if it's, a web client, you're doing JavaScript front-endy type stuff, versus, server-side operations, console apps, versus GUI apps. I mean, console apps are still around.
Yeah, they are. I've seen
way too many of them lately, especially. Windows versus pretty much anything else. Mobile versus, big iron. Like you got a lot of different axes that you could go on. Another thing that could be different is the paradigm. So like you maybe do an object oriented and the language you want to look at is procedural or it's functional. Because all the Delphi stuff I'm doing it's very heavily procedural.
Yeah, that makes sense. Which is funny because I've been looking into functional.
Yeah.
Because that's just sort of an area I've gravitated towards as I've learned more about it. It's kind of the way I think.
Yeah. Well, and it's the way I think too, but for getting, really low level.
Yeah, you do have to, the lower you go, the
more
procedural you get.
Yeah. And then you get to assembler and then it's all spaghetti at that point. Another thing that differs is the syntax. So a lot of languages are C-based, and so you can kind of shift between them, like C# and JavaScript, for instance. We know people that have done one and switched to the other, vice versa. JavaScript and any of the other, C-based languages also, with some caveats.
Here's one for you: C# and Java.
Yep.
We have a friend that just started a job today, and she learned C# in a boot camp, and the job does involve some C# and some JavaScript, but there's also a lot of Java involved. And she said that ever since she got hired, before starting her first day, she's been studying Java.
Yeah, well, they all have kind of the same parent, right?
Yeah.
You go back to C, and a lot of the constructs come from there. It's very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's helped me with Delphi. Even though Delphi is Pascal-based, Visual Basic, which was one of the early ones I used, they stole a lot of stuff from Pascal.
Yeah.
And that's just made it very easy for me. Now, of course, they didn't have pointers in Visual Basic, thank goodness, because that would have been awful. But, that's been a huge help. Another thing is the level of hand-holding that the language or the platform does. This tends to be more of a platform thing than a language thing, but a lot of those are kind of tied together.
Nowadays, especially.
Yeah, but like the way that it manages memory, like do you have to, if you allocate memory, do you have to free it? Or does it get handled by something? Garbage collection, that kind of stuff. Thread safety, whether it's distributed by default, those things are things you have to consider. And so for this podcast episode, what I did, I started looking, and I actually had an outline that I threw away. Because
that explains a lot about what was going on.
Yeah. Because I found a thing, because I started out with learning a second language, and I didn't type programming in. And I ran across an article by Tim Ferris, the guy from the 4-Hour Workweek, who does all these crazy experiments on himself to figure out how to optimize. Like he's just optimize everything. And so he has 12 rules for learning a new spoken or written language. And I scanned through those rules real quick, and I'm like, well, this makes perfect sense. It fits with the way we're doing programming languages with, some changes, obviously.
Yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
And so I went with those. And I'll kind of rattle these off real quick and then we'll get into it. Well, the first one is learn the right words the right way. Enough to get by, basically. Not necessarily learning all the words in the language. Point number 2 is learn cognates. Those are things that are the same across languages. Like, for instance, if you're learning Japanese, there's English loanwords in Japanese. If you order a donut, it's a donatsu.
Okay.
Right? I think that's right anyway. My memory's a little rusty on that, but I'm pretty sure that's correct. Another thing is interact daily in the language. Do spaced repetition, in other words, in a controlled environment. So that's flashcards, that kind of thing. Daily spoken practice, which is practice in an uncontrolled environment. Difference between katas and sparring, if you want to look at it that way. The next thing is look for free resources, because the best resources on the web are free for most things. You can keep them for PHP.
Oh, man. Well, that's me.
That was bad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That was a bad joke. I just want to see if everybody's awake. Realize that your experience in a previous language makes it easier for you to infer rules. Like, don't be intimidated as much. Like, use your intuition a little bit more. Learn to effectively use mnemonics. In other words, have a better way to sneak in to memorize things and hang on to it. Number 8 is embrace mistakes, because you're going to learn from mistakes more than you are from success.
Exactly,
in most cases. Number 9 is create SMART goals. We talked about this in the goal setting episode way back there at some point. SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. The next one is jump from conversational to mastery level. One after that is learn to sound more native. In other words, speaking conventions, idioms, pauses, how you say in a particular language, because not every,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, because they'll kind of, different languages have a different way of doing that, right?
And inflections, too.
Inflections, yeah. Especially with Chinese and stuff like that. You don't want to insult somebody's mother.
Yeah.
And then actually keep going until you get things down. So don't switch languages too early.
Yeah,
so
you don't want to be the guy that can write hello world in 20 languages.
Yeah. Okay, so the first one is basically your Pareto rule. That's the 80-20 rule. So pick the most commonly used constructs you see and master those before learning all the edge cases.
The best way to do this is to just build something.
Yeah.
Learn what you need as you need it. This is how I learned my first language.
Say learned English, for darn sure.
Yeah, but I would say that's how I learned my first programming language, C#. Well, not really my first, but
yeah,
the one that I'm using now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So say your first one was probably like batch scripts or something. Yeah. Yeah. Something horrible that you don't want to talk about,
I did learn some DOS prompt back in 4th grade.
Yeah, because you needed it for stuff.
Playing Oregon Trail.
Yeah.
And you can also look at online code samples from places like GitHub to see what things are most commonly used.
Yeah, and I did this some with Delphi so that I kind of had a little bit of the language constructs. I found some open source Delphi code and looked through it and said, okay, here's how you do a for loop. Here's how you do a while loop. Here's how you do just a basic set. And I took some notes real quick. When
I'm like listening to another podcast or reading about a language that I don't know much about, I'll usually do that. I'll go on and look for code samples of common things that, like, I know how to do this in 2 or 3 different languages. Like, I can do a for loop, I can do in C#, JavaScript.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a pattern thing. It's like, okay, I need to know, if you've never seen a door before, what's the easiest way to see what a door looks like? Walk over to a house and look at the door.
I was going to say go to Walmart, but
yeah,
it works too.
Yeah. You see all kinds of other things at Walmart you don't want to see, though. Let's be honest here, people at Walmart.
Yeah, well.
And the biggest thing here is to think about how bad the worst employed programmer in a particular language is, and then realize that's only bad if you stay there. Otherwise, it's a good starting point. Like, that person knows enough to be dangerous.
Yes.
And that's your first goal, is to actually be able to do something useful, even if that's just damage. So that's the idea of the Pareto principle in software learning. Now, the next thing is learning cognates. And you'll see this in language where we borrow words from other languages.
We don't ever do that in English. I don't know what you're talking about.
I know. Tacos, for instance. Like we don't ever steal words from other languages except for like every other language.
We don't steal the words. We just
we just borrow them permanently. But yeah, I mean, because this is a fast way to learn a lot of useful stuff in a human language, and it's the same way in programming languages. Like a for loop in a C-based language is going to look very, very similar. It's not going to be necessarily exactly the same. But, a lot of the constructs, like if you've done C# and you've got to do JavaScript, your basic looping constructs are very, very similar. And your array manipulation is similar. Like that's a functionally equivalent to cognates.
Well, it's like if you've done JavaScript for years, you can come and look at C# code and get the basic gist of what it's saying.
Yeah.
And then, ask questions about the details. And you have informed questions when you're asking about it. Next, you want to use the language daily. This could be code katas, online samples. These are really good for it. Or build a small app, working on it daily. When I first started learning C#, I found a tutorial program in Windows 8. That's what I had. It was before Windows 10. And I couldn't afford.
And after Windows 7? Is that the progression?
Well, I couldn't afford to buy Windows 7 because they wouldn't let you downgrade for free.
Right.
So, anyways, I found a tutorial on building a calculator app.
Yep. I remember that.
Yeah. Because I went through the tutorial, built the calculator, just a basic math function calculator, and I thought, oh, you know what? I can add trig functionality to this. So I did. And then I thought, oh, you know what? I can make this a scientific calculator. So I just started adding all sorts of stuff. I probably spent a good 3, maybe 4 months.
Yeah. Adding to that thing.
Adding to it because I would think of something else I wanted to do. And I had other little things I was doing too. But I probably learned the most just from, oh, I want to add this function to it. So I had to learn how to do that, learn all the ins and outs of it, and
I remember that
language.
And that's a huge help. I mean, code katas are good for this too.
Yeah.
But I mean, like if you really want to do it and run into the stuff that you're probably going to use at some point and be able to say in an interview, hey, I've solved this kind of problem.
Yes.
Like just go find something and do it. Mm-hmm. You can throw it away afterward. It's, some apps are just for learning. It's okay.
Yeah. Or you can post it online. And just hey, look at this thing I built. I'm brand new.
Yeah.
You also want practice in an uncontrolled environment.
Right. And this is stuff like, well, you kind of did that with your extension, right? Because if you're doing code katas and a simple sample, that's the controlled environment because the author has presumably checked all the things and made sure they work, and you've got code that you can look at and see what's wrong. Whereas what you did, you're like, hey, I'm going to add, the arctangent function in here. Well, what happens? Well, you find out that there's values you can't put in there, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but for some reason, but you find that sort of stuff out. And when it blows up, you have to debug it. Mm-hmm. There's your uncontrolled environment.
Well, in my case, I had to debug it. And then I just asked you.
Yeah.
Of course, you made me do a lot of it on my own anyways, because I needed to learn.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, that's true. That was sort of starting off with a controlled environment, which was the tutorial for the basic calculator, and then building out. So, like, some of these apply to learning your first language just as much as a second.
Yes.
And that's something I guess I wanted to point out was think of learning your first language when doing this, because the things that you did there are going to help.
Right.
Especially the ones that helped you.
Yeah, because you can remember it and you know how to do it in another one. But especially for the second one, a lot of people go, oh, I'm going to go straight into developing a new app in this thing. And that really hurts. Because, I mean, I did this with Ruby, right? I was like, oh, I'm going to learn Ruby. Let me get my Linux set up when I hadn't really used Linux much. Let me get Vim when I hadn't really used Vim much. And let me use MySQL when I haven't used MySQL much. And let's start building an app with Ruby on Rails. Yikes. In that. Now, we'll say Vim plus, the console is paradise, but you put all those other things together when you don't know any of them, that's uncomfortable really fast.
I like the idea of Vim, especially as I learn more keyboard shortcuts in Visual Studio, to think that you could pretty much do everything in Vim on the keyboard. it's a cool concept, and I'd started learning it, but other things picked up. So
yeah,
and that happens. And that's life. That's something that you deal with.
Well, and it's handy too if you ever have to log in to a server that's headless, and you can't get the GUI up and running, because you can still do things in Vim. You can write a script that fixes it. Yes, I have done that a few times.
Yeah.
So it's always worthwhile, but you want to practice in an uncontrolled environment that's safe enough that you can succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Not, don't do like I did with the Ruby stuff. I mean, I did okay, but there was a lot of suffering that happened there. And you can build a small app and just keep on debugging, which is what you did with the calculator, and it works fine.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great way to learn, because I built up on it, and then I kind of applied that way of learning to other things, like with my website.
Yep.
I started off in something I knew pretty well, which was WordPress.
Yep.
And then moved to Hexo. Really enjoying Hexo. I probably won't leave there for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. It's much less painful, I can tell you that.
So you want to also find forums for the language that you're learning. I know, like, when I was learning C#, I had the tutorials, and then, of course, Stack Overflow is great for a lot of things. Reddit is good as well.
Yeah, and another thing I'll suggest, too, that will actually help you more than it should, is do a Google search for, whatever my language is, sucks. Yeah, so, like, if you want to learn stuff about C# that you would never think about, look for C# sucks.
I believe there's plenty of stuff out there on that.
Oh, yeah, because it's like, oh, by the way, it moves stuff around when you already have a pointer to it, and, breaks unmanaged code, or it does this or it does that. And those little details are all the gotchas. Like, that's a way to sweep a big net and catch all the gotchas in that language in one spot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's free.
Use your experience with other languages to infer things about the one you're learning. Some structures are the same across languages.
Or they require all the same parts.
Yeah.
Is a big thing. Like, let's say that you have an array or a list.
Okay.
And you're iterating over it. Well, what do you have to have? Well, you've got to have the array. You've got to have some kind of structure that lets you loop. You got to have some way of tracking position and getting things at a position. Yeah. And you got to have some way of knowing when the loop's done.
Okay.
Regardless of the language. So you figure out what those things are in the language you're used to, and then you go find them in the language that you're learning. So you can infer that. And that's actually fairly common in foreign language speakers as well. You look for ways to say certain things or to avoid certain situations because you've already been burned by it in your own language.
I can see what you're saying there, because this is very similar to, like I said, when I hear about a language, if I want to get an idea of how that language is written, I'll go look up a structure that I know in C#.
Right.
It's like, I'll look up for loops and Fortran.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know what goes into a for loop. I can look at that and go, okay, this is what each part is.
Yeah, that's how you express it.
Yeah.
Because you're not having to you're not having to relearn the pieces you need. You just have to learn how to glue them back together.
Yeah, you have to learn
with some exceptions, obviously, but.
Well, it's like when we talked about the benefit of the design patterns is that they are for all object-oriented languages so that we can talk across language.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's what a for loop is, right? That's an iterator pattern.
Yeah.
It's essentially, okay, I know I have this pattern in language A. What does it look like in language B? Now I can start cross-comparing, and you pick up so much stuff doing that you'll actually start to develop instincts in that second language, and stuff will just fall out if it's consistent. Not, if it's like MATLAB or something, you're in another place and you're not going to get out. But if it's a normal language, you're probably okay.
I've gotten to a point now that when I'm reading code, I don't even notice the green.
Yeah.
The comments, because if I'm trying to read the code.
Well, comments are lies anyway. And if they're not now, they will be.
Except for mine. Mine are always true.
Yeah. If you have a comment that's always true and another comment that's always false and they disagree, how do you determine... Wait, that's philosophy. That's not programming. I'm sorry. But, you can cross-apply these kind of things.
I should say that by my comments are always true, as my comments are so terse.
Well, my comments are always false.
I was like, I'm getting a little not philosophical, but if your comments are always true, then your comments are useless.
Or they've accidentally been put into a JavaScript variable and they're equal true. Or you did an if on them and it's they're assigned. Let's just say that I ran into that one today, and there's always little wrinkles like that, right?
Yeah.
But for the most part, that gives you a ability to kind of move out into this other language.
Mm-hmm. Hey guys, I just want to interrupt here real quick to tell y'all about a brand new conference that I'm going to be attending this coming April on the 21st and 22nd called Codeland. It's put on by our friends over at Code Newbies, and you can check out more about it at codelandconf.com.
Now, the next one is embrace mistakes. And this is actually something that's really, really hard to do, especially for programmers, because we like to be the smartest people in the room.
And a lot of times we are.
Yeah, on average. And this is tricky because it really intersects badly if you have an ego. And I have a story, Spanish, actually, not anything to do with programming. All right. So I thought one day, I was like, you know what? I'm going to talk to the waiter in Spanish. Now, bear in mind, I took Spanish for like a semester in high school, and high school was not recent. Let's just put it that way. And so I'm at the Mexican restaurant, and, you make a mistake, right? So, you go, like a perro con hongo, so a dog with mushrooms. And I meant pollo. And we had a good laugh, and I've never made that mistake since.
Well, I took 3 years of French in high school because French is le langage l'amour.
Right.
Yeah. And
how's that helped you out, buddy?
We had a mutual friend of ours in college that lived in the same town that my parents moved to while I was in school. We'd carpool, back home together on the weekends. We'd take turns and stuff. And he also took French. And so we're riding back, and I look up, and he's got the car seat instructions in his car, like on the visor. It's in like French, Spanish, Italian, and English. And we're joking around because we've both taken French, so I'm reading it in French. And of course, I'm doing my best Pepe Le Pew voice. And he's like, dude, that actually sounds romantic when you're talking about children exploding and stuff.
And French is like that. It's it's kind of like German frequently sounds angry.
Yeah.
Even if it's not.
And the hilarious thing is, I said, yeah, if you're out with a girl and you just, sitting in the car, you want to get romantic, you can just like look up and read that.
Yeah, I don't think that'll work.
He tried it.
Of course he did.
And she looked at him and said, why are you telling me about car seats? Because she spoke French.
And there's the downside of trying to be clever.
And they got married and had a few kids.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, so. But,
Yeah. But, if you embrace mistakes, like, this will help you learn faster than anything because you're going to make them.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're not embracing mistakes, you're avoiding mistakes. Mm-hmm. And what do you do when you avoid mistakes? You don't take any risks.
Yeah.
And that kills your learning opportunities with a new language. So go out and screw stuff up, and you'll feel better for it. Take down a database server or two. It's fine. Just not in production, not on any network I'm on. If you do it on a production network, do it on somebody else's so I can laugh. I'm not telling you not to do it. Just don't do it to me.
Yeah.
And the next one is one that we discussed before, which is create smart goals. I guess, we kind of talked about this before, how to come up with goals that you can actually achieve. I forget what episode number that was. It was like 12 or something. It was way back there.
All right. Well, we just took a short pause while I looked up the actual episode, and it was not episode 12, as Will thought. Episode 12 was substance abuse among developers.
Well, that is some people's goal. Clearly, at several places I've worked.
Well, yeah. But the one you're referring to is the Take Control of Your Life, which was episode 16.
I was off by 4.
Well, it's not terrible, but,
I'm growing my beard back out, by the way. Right now, on the podcast, live. That's my goal, buddy. So let's talk about goals. What does SMART mean?
All right. SMART is specific, Measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Specific, meaning you know exactly what the goal is, not, I'm going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee.
Well, I mean, if you want to do that, that is where the goal is.
There is this kind of abstract goal, or there is a specific...
Yeah, it's a difference between saying, I'm going to be rich and I'm going to have $1 million.
Yeah.
So specific goals, measurable goals, attainable. In other words, you don't want to say, I'm going to be the first person on, Pluto's moon. Because that's probably not something you're going to do.
Yes.
And if you do, you're going to be an icicle.
Unless your name is Mark Watney. Dude survived on Mars.
Right.
In a book.
Yeah. I took a potato plant with me and I lived on Mars.
Yeah, there you go.
We're settlers. We settle for things. Sorry, crossing my pop culture up there. So
no, but you want your goal needs to be something that is attainable. We have met several people who were going to learn 4 or 5 different languages in the course of a month or 2.
Or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I remember talking to that guy. I wonder how he is.
Haven't heard back from him. So,
but if you do, it'll say "Hello World."
Yeah, I mean, for most people, no, that is not attainable. I haven't heard back from him, so I don't know. He may have actually attained that. For him, it may have been, but for the majority of people, that's not an attainable goal.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to earn a Nobel Prize because it's Tuesday. Not happening. Because it's not Tuesday, for one thing.
Relevant.
Yeah, that means the goal actually is going to do something for you.
And time-bound, meaning that there is a time frame to this. This isn't, someday I'm going to go do this. But it also means, going back to attainable and putting time-bound and attainable together. It means that you give yourself the appropriate amount of time.
Right. So that it's actually doable.
I took about 1.5 years to learn before I started really looking for a job.
Yeah.
And then it took...
And you got all kinds of crap the entire time because, you're not looking for the job that you're messing around with all this stuff to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's not attainable and that's going to distract from what I'm trying to do.
Exactly.
And so we don't want to get too heavy into the goal stuff, but I mean, this is pretty important to get right. The next thing is to jump from basic to mastery, right? Once you're kind of in the language and you're reasonably comfortable. And honestly, the best way to do this, is to get your code in front of other people. Like actually build something and put it out there and go, now tell me why I'm horrible.
Code reviews.
Yeah, code reviews. Pair programming does this automatically. That's why it's suggested because it's not formalized or typically formalized in organizations. They put it off and stuff like that.
That's sort of what happened to me today with my boss. We were doing some pair stuff because I was having an issue in one area, and he noticed some areas that I had done things that worked but weren't the best way of doing them.
Yeah.
And he took that as here's a learning opportunity. And he showed me some stuff. I'm like, I didn't know that. And he goes, it's kind of pretty advanced stuff. And so I learned and I grew as a programmer because of it. And then he turned around and posted, of course, he didn't mention me by name, but he posted about it on our Slack channel.
Yeah.
Just so he's like, well, you're pretty good. If you're having issues with this, then other people might, and they're just not coming. It's not coming to the surface. So post about it.
Bring it out there. Yeah. And I showed my my business partner on Agulus a trick with Enumerable, which I need to show you at some point.
Yeah.
It's a stupid little thing, but that's what a code review does. I mean, it puts the stuff out there where you can learn from other people and they can learn from you, and that's the fastest way to iterate. Another thing you can do is if you're by yourself, like you don't have a mentor, you don't have somebody that you can bounce stuff off of, is just practice a ton. Just constantly be writing code. I mean, that's what I did with Visual Basic from, I don't know, for almost 2 years, maybe closer to 3.
That's what, like when I made the jump from doing iterations with loops to doing them with Link.
Yeah.
Everything. I went back and rewrote code.
Yeah.
Like working code because I was like, I found a new, better way to do it. Let me go fix it.
Well, and I will tell you this is something I do. I don't copy and paste code.
Yeah.
because either I know how to do it and I type it, or I don't know how to do it and I put it on one screen and then I retype it.
Yes.
Because that gets it into the muscle memory, and or not really muscle memory, because that's not really a thing, but it makes it where it sticks for me. And I think that tends to help a lot of developers, honestly.
That's true. I mean, you told me about that, and I said, well, I've already been doing similar stuff to that with note taking and things like that in school.
Yeah.
When I was in med school, especially. And so making that switch from doing the note taking like it was in school, typing everything out when I was learning something wasn't a big jump, but it has made a huge difference, because now I'll find something, a way of doing something that, I don't, it's different, or I'm having trouble with something, it's not working, I find the solution. First off, I don't understand copy and pasting it, because you have to go in and change the variables and all that junk. Whereas if I just type it out, I type it out right, and it's less stressful.
Well, there's a guy that, I clean up a lot of his code. He doesn't work there anymore, but I can find some crap code that he wrote. I'll take the first line of it and copy it and paste it into Google. Uh-huh. And then I can find the Stack Overflow or MSDN article that it came from. Like, you don't really want to be that guy, because, the other thing too is you're building a memory of copying and pasting, which is pretty much useless.
Control-C, Control-V.
Yeah. That's just not a useful thing to do. So don't do that. Like, actually type it back out. If you don't know how to do it, type it. And then eventually you'll get to the point where you can type it without the crutch. And then you're good. You actually know the language.
Now, I heard somewhere that there are these things for writers that won't let you use the delete.
Yeah.
And you have to, keep typing.
Yeah, there's one, actually, that will delete all your stuff if you stop typing for 20 seconds or something.
Yeah.
Which is horrifying.
Yeah.
When you have a small child and dogs and everything else, it's like, you can't even use this. But apparently it works. And
it works for people that have issue with focusing.
Yeah.
Whereas, someone like you don't have an issue focusing. It's, you have external causes that...
Yeah.
And... So it wouldn't be a good thing for you. What I was thinking about was the ones that won't let you use the backspace, or I have heard that there are certain plugins, and I don't know which editor it's for, that will not, that you can put the plugin on and will not let you use copy paste.
Yeah. I would like to write one of those for, Visual Studio that, when they type something in and they try to copy and paste it, it goes to another random file in the solution and deletes it.
That's cruel.
And just absolutely, it can be like dayruin or .vsix will be, if you copy and paste from the web and put code in there, we're going to blow up something random in your app, because that's what's going to result anyway.
Now, I will say sometimes I have, when working in Visual Studio, opened up Visual Studio Code, and just so that, because to make it more legible,
yeah,
copy and paste it into VS Code, and then used that to guide what I was doing.
Yeah, now I've done that a few times too, but
no,
yeah. So anyway, that's how you jump from basic to mastery. Is just a crap ton of practice and exposure and that feedback loop and all those kind of things.
You also want to use the idioms of the language. You don't want to write JavaScript in C#,
and vice versa. And I know quite a few C# programmers that when they write JavaScript, it looks like C#. And I'm trying to think of some samples. I mean, some of it's little stuff like, putting the curly brace on the line below an if. Because when a JavaScript programmer sees that, they go, okay, this is somebody that doesn't natively use JavaScript.
Yeah.
You'll also see things like, when they do an if statement, instead of going, if they want to check, say, is something undefined. JavaScript, you go if variable, and that's all you got to do. But they'll do it explicitly, and you can immediately tell. And that's what you really want to avoid, because you do want it to be idiomatic, so that other people that use that language can reason about it.
Yeah, and it's funny because our front-end dev has been learning some C#, just to make the team more cross-compatible, I guess. And he was joking with me the other day. He's like, I can tell when you make the switch from C# to JavaScript in your day.
Yeah.
It's because you code like you're in C# for
a few minutes.
And he's like, I can tell, there's it's a flow. It's there's C# and JavaScript, and then there's JavaScript.
Yep.
It's like it just takes you a few statements or whatever to get into the JavaScript flow.
Yeah.
Of course, he picks on me for my fonts, and I'm like, dude, I have separate fonts in Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. Like, one is sans serif and one is serif, so that I know which one I'm in.
Yeah. That's totally reasonable. I mean, but the big thing is actually writing idiomatic code. Like, if you're writing, for instance, Ruby on Rails code, you want to use their naming conventions. And, this goes down to everything like, I've known programmers from Visual Basic or Delphi or several other languages that when they get into C#, they use the Hungarian notation thing. So it's like, okay, this is a public property, so it'll be P, and it's a string, so it'd be P, STR, and the variable name. That, like, C# programmers just immediately start pulling their hair out. They're like, what is this crap? Like, you don't want to do that. You want to get into the habits of that language, because those habits evolved for that language and the ecosystem that it lives in. So you want those, because you don't want to stand out, because that's a big thing with learning language. Like, you could be, semi-literate and, mostly communicate in grunts, but you can get by with English well enough. People aren't going to notice, because there's lots of those people. Like we said before, go to Walmart.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's funny. Today when I was working with my boss, and, he was in the database trying to help me figure out why the code wasn't working that was writing to it. And, he was like, it had to do with one of the join tables. And he was like, talking about our DBA, he's like, I just don't know why he puts ID columns in join tables. He's like, I get some of it, but it's not necessary.
I understand why he does.
Yeah.
But
and I was like, that's cool you say that, but I made that table.
Yeah. But like, nobody knew.
Yeah, he didn't like.
Well, if your code matches the team, right, you have to really tick somebody off for them to do a history on the file and try to figure out who wrote this crap.
Yeah.
Like, if it's close enough, they go, okay, it was an honest mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you use the proper idioms, because you don't want that friction there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you were just glancing at it, like if you were just glancing at the sequel, it would look very similar. Mainly because I had his stuff up on one side, and I'm like,
yeah.
That, and I used the developer tools to develop it. But I tried to use the same naming conventions and everything, because I did get caught on one issue with with a column name, but that was an honest mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of learning too.
Yeah. I mean, that's the big deal with being idiomatic, because you can say things that mean something, but if you're not using the proper idiom, it's very easy to miscommunicate.
Yes.
And that's in spoken language, it's in written language, it's in computer languages as well.
Yeah.
And the last one is don't switch languages too early.
Because at some point, the language will get on your nerves in a major way. Yeah. And you're going to miss your first language. How many times learning C# did I say, I miss C++? Yeah. Not that many, but...
Yeah. Well, and I've had this with Delphi a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
Because, it's not really the environment, but a lot of things are very verbose. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't like typing out the word end. I would rather use a closing curly brace, like I do in C#.
Yes.
Or C, or C++, or JavaScript, or Java, or...
Yeah, C-based language.
And it's like, okay, it's just 2 extra keystrokes. Why does this annoy you so much? It's like, well, because it bothers you. Yeah. And you're going to get to that point, and so you have to be able to push past that to get better, to get to be where you're a true polyglot. It's the same thing if you learn another human language. Like if you go and you say, okay, I'm going to pick up, I always use Icelandic as an example, right? I'm going to pick up Icelandic, and then, oh yeah, there's all the very weird things that happen with, whether something is male or female or neuter, and what happens in a group. And you hit that stuff and you just trip over it forever. You're not going to get to be a true polyglot until you get past that. So you kind of have to take the scars. And like we said before, you don't want to be the person that can write a Hello World app in 10 different languages. That person is unemployed.
Exactly. I know a few of those.
Or they're writing tutorial articles on how to write Hello World in whatever.
Which are usually free, so
yeah,
they're unemployed.
Yeah, but they don't call it that.
No. Well, that pretty much wraps us up for learning a second language. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, just want to have something that I tie together with the whole language learning thing, and that's the general idea of using what you know to figure out the stuff you don't. That was kind of the main point of this whole thing. Is there's a lot of stuff that you know that you may not completely value at the full level of its capability to actually help you. And this comes out especially when you're learning a second programming language. You've already gone through the learning curve to get up to a certain point in whatever language you're using. That still has value for you, learning something new. And so try to use idioms, try to use metaphors, try to, use parallels between different systems to learn the second system by tying it to your knowledge of the first. And this will help you quite a bit across your career just because you're able to quickly figure things out. You're able to quickly express things in another way so that you can ask reasonable questions. And so just use that similarity, and that will help you learn a second language. It'll help you learn another platform. It'll help you switch to another operating system. Like, this is just kind of a general learning rule. That's what I got.
For Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.